KL Rahul at one point was one of the worst test batters to ever play for India. How has KL Rahul turned things around so drastically? To understand how much KL Rahul has seriously improved in the test format, it's important to divide his test career into two parts. The first is until the BGT of 2024. He had a batting average of 33.8, which was the worst for an Indian batter who has batted in the top 6 and at least had played 50 test matches. To say that he had the worst test batting average just says something about KL Rahul, the test batter at that point. He had played 53 matches, scored 2,900 runs while struggling to do so. He also had 815 50s with, of course, a batting average of 33.8. But to understand how much he has improved, it's important to look at these numbers. Because since then, he's played 15 matches, scored more than 1,000 runs already with an average of 45. And in all of this, he already has 400s and 550s. The fact that in this time period, KL Rahul is the highest run scorer for the Indian team just says something about how much he has improved, because a couple of years down the line, you wouldn't ever have imagined this or imagined the fact that KL Rahul is still part of the playing 11. But the real question is, how has that happened? What has he changed? A lot of people do talk about how he's become more disciplined and all of that, but what does that even mean? Now, before we even dig deeper, it's important to look at numbers very broadly, and that is why we look at control percentages. When you look at this graph, you'll realize that his control percentage is not just against pace, but also against spin, and of course, overall has only improved. In fact, all of these numbers are close to 90%. And even though there's a lot of people talking about how he does struggle against spin, which is something we will get into later on, he still has a control percentage of 91%. And this is where we look at his technique and realize, even if it's in the last 5 years, he's changed so many things for the better. Now, the image on the left is 2021, where he scored 100 in England, and the image on the right is 2025, where once again he went on to score 100 in England. Now, when you look at his stance itself, there are a few obvious changes. KL Rahul has always been a side-on batter, which basically means that when you look at his right elbow, it's perpendicular to the umpire. On the left and the right, the images are very, very similar. But then when you look at his bat, there's something slightly different about it. The image on the left, his bat face is slightly open and almost closer to him. But it's the opposite on the image on the right. If you look at his bat, not only is it lower and closer to the height of the stump, but it's also faced, which basically means that the face of the bat is completely parallel to the ground and you can't see any part of the bat face being opened. And not just that, because his bat is a bit lower, his hands are lower too. And because all of these attributes are very, very low, you can also see him bending a lot more lower than the image on the left. Now, something very peculiar about KL Rahul's initial movement is that he used to move from the leg stump to the off stump or middle and off stump, and his bat face started to open a little more. But now KL Rahul hardly does that anymore. He might, depending on the pitch, move his back foot, but he hardly ever moves it across to the middle stump even. It's always between leg and middle stump, which is also why he stays leg side of the ball. Which, to put it very, very simply, he's trying to play more for the in-swinger than the outswinger. And this is where you will realize how KL Rahul's technique is so super tight at this point. We go back to the image on the left where you can see his back lift. Not only can you see his back lift higher than it was in the initial stages, which is what it normally would be, you can also see his head falling, not across, it's not the worst, but he had tendencies of his head falling across. But when you look at the image on the right, not only is his back lift not as high, when you look at his head, and this is where KL Rahul's becomes so much more impressive. It's always above the stump, regardless of the kind of shot he's going to play. Of course, he's now playing the cover drive and he needs to reach the pitch of the ball, which is also why he strides forward. But until he executes his shot, his head is always above the stump, which is so much more impressive. Which means he's always aware of his stump. He's always aware of his off stump. And he can almost never not judge the ball right. And because of all of this, when he thinks he can play a particular shot outside the off stump, he more often than not gets it right. And he's made all of these changes to make sure that he's playing as straight as possible. He's getting his bat as straight as possible because, like I said, he's playing leg side of the ball, basically trying to play for the in-swingers or the ball that's coming in, which is also why he doesn't want his outside edge to be a threat. All of this is to make sure that he's not unnecessarily chasing the balls outside the off stump, and he just knows that if any ball is outside the off stump, he can just leave. In order to make KL Rahul the test opener chase deliveries outside the off stump, if you're a fast bowler, you would deliver it on a good length outside the off stump. And KL Rahul fell victim to this quite a bit before. Because before in this line and length, he used to just average 15, just 15. And out of all of the dismissals that he's had, 40% of them have come on this line and length. But because of all of these changes that he has made and become more disciplined, not only does he average 40 on this line and length, he only gets dismissed 11.8% of the time, which is a significant improvement. So much of how he has improved is because of a template he's now sticking to, a template that is working for him, and that is how he goes about his starts in the test format. Wait till I talk about amount of balls faced by KL Rahul, the test opener, because that will boggle your mind. But in the phase between 0 and 15 overs in a test match, KL Rahul is the third highest run scorer. Not just that, now we know he's scoring runs, but he's also doing this with an average of 57. Which means that he's not getting out at all. In fact, he has the best average in the top 10 run scorers in this phase of a test match. If you were to compare the before and after, this graph is in front of you and you will be shocked. For someone who didn't even average 30 in this phase, now averages 57. That's how much he's become better. Now, of course, when you look at the strike rate, his strike rate against the new ball may have come down, but in the test match, you don't really care about a strike rate, especially if you're an opener, and that is something KL Rahul has taken to heart, because in this phase and in this time period, KL Rahul is the only test batter to have faced more than 1,000 deliveries. More than 1,000 deliveries is insane. In fact, even when you look at overall, all the phases of a test match in this time period, there are only 3 batters to have faced more than 2,000 deliveries. You have Steve Smith, Joe Root, and KL Rahul. And of course, KL Rahul does top the list. Now, we've understood that KL Rahul does like to take his own time while settling into the test format, because of course he does, because he is able to score runs. But the real question is, how is he scoring these runs? But there is this notion with KL Rahul, especially in this time period, that he is leaving the balls a lot more, he's defending a lot more, which is true, because 32% of his shots have been defended and 23% of the time he does leave the ball. But it's not more than the time period before, which might surprise quite a few people. On the contrary, however, he does play the flick and the cover drive a lot more and does push deliveries for runs, which also means that a lot of fast bowlers are now bowling closer to his body, also because they do know that he does leave the ball a lot more than other batters around him. But it's the fact that now KL Rahul in the test format has dictated terms in the sense that fast bowlers are now bowling to him where he wants the bowler to bowl and not outside the off stump, because the bowlers know that KL Rahul can just leave the ball and keep leaving until the bowlers tire out. Now, the resemblance of this template was even seen before this period even started, the successful period that we are talking about, because in 2021, he did score a 129 in England against England, and later that year in December, he did score another 100 in South Africa, which means it was starting to show. It just happened to blossom a few years down the line. Because can you imagine, KL Rahul, the batter that KL Rahul is, until 2025, he didn't have not one series, where he scored more than 400 runs in a series. But come 2025 and in England, he scored more than 500. And it's of course not a coincidence, because it's the template that he used, because this is the only time in his test career where he faced more than 1,000 deliveries in a series, which again is insane. And it's because of all of these changes that KL Rahul has become not just more respectful as a test opener, but a lot more reliable. Because before, it was only 28% of the time he would cross 40 and more in the test format. And this is even more signified right before the BGT even started. Because since the start of 2022 until the 2024 Border Gavaskar Trophy, across 21 innings, he only had 450 plus scores. And out of these 21 innings, 16 of them, he couldn't even reach the score of 25. He was in that bad of a form. But right now, as compared to before, 39% of the time he's crossed 40 and more in the test format. He's as consistent as one can be. Interestingly and funnily enough, in the same time period that he's been so successful, he's been dismissed most amount of times between the score of 80 and 105. A very peculiar stat, but just something for you to know. But that being said, as a test opener, if you're scoring anything between 80 and 105 and getting out, you're probably doing your job more often than not. Now, there is a notion going around in the world of cricket that that he does struggle against off spin. It is a struggle that he's been having. Right, and this is where we come to KL Rahul struggles against the spin, especially the off spin, because that's a narrative going on around in the last couple of weeks. And I will be completely honest, it is a narrative that I don't quite understand. Because when you look at these averages, sure, he did struggle in 2024 because he only averaged 16. In fact, even in 2023, he only averaged 5.7. But that being said, across 155 deliveries in 2025, he did have an average of 46. And even this year, right before the Sri Lanka Test match where he did play against Afghanistan, he didn't get out to an off spinner, which might just suggest that he may have had struggles against the off spinners, but it's not a potent threat that people should generally be worried about. Now, there might be a trend where he does struggle against certain kind of off spinners, but that is also because he's doing really well against the fast bowlers, and a batter is a human in the end, and you can get out in one way or the other, and that's what KL Rahul's doing. KL Rahul in the last couple of years has become by far one of the best test batters for the Indian team. His improvement is massive, and you can only respect him for that. Not only is he scoring runs, but as a test opener, to call a test opener reliable is such a rarity in the world of test cricket, but you can do that with KL Rahul at this point. You know that in an innings or two, he will score those runs. Just goes to show that even a man like him who's played test cricket for such a long time might just take a few years longer to get used to things, but once he does, he can be really fruitful. This has been a video on KL Rahul and how eye-opening his career has been so far. If you enjoyed this video, like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. This was our old school technique and numbers video, so let's know this is something you still enjoy. Like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching.